Welcome to the first edition of Make Pro Wrestling Majestic Again. I am Tiger Height.
And I'm Peanut Gallery.
Yes, so obviously the green screen is not quite big enough to put us both in there, but we will work on it. There is a Amazon wish list as well, so check it out. This is our first edition of the show, and we're going to be talking about, because there were a couple of times over the last couple of weeks that both sides, AEW and WWE, have said we're open to working together.
Right.
And with all of these other companies opening the forbidden door,
right,
quote unquote, that could be an opportunity. It could be something that we will see. So, Peanut Gallery, we're going to start with your new segment.
Okay, we're going to start with, it's no longer called the Bible Study. It is now called, drumroll please, hold on. Heckling from the hard camera.
Yes.
With Peanut Gallery.
So,
and I'll give you a brief history behind it. So, if you know, the Peanut Gallery originated in the vaudevillain days. Or vaudeville days, not vaudevillain. Who the fuck? Anyways,
well, they were
called vaudevillains, but it was from the vaudeville days, and the Peanut Gallery was the cheap seats,
right?
And so I thought, well, where are the cheap seats in pro wrestling? And they tend to be where the hard camera is because people want to be on television,
right?
So they want them more expensive. So that's kind of where that came from. So it's pretty much the same kind of format, but it's just a little bit different in terms of what it's called.
Right.
It's going to be more of a cultural.
Obviously, religion will still be a factor in there, but you're gonna talk about the cultural significance of the things instead of maybe the historical part of it.
So, what I did for this segment was I did a couple of different. Just a couple different, what is it called? A couple different, ways in which these cross promotions did very well.
Right.
Especially because, especially in the past, a lot of these promotions that did the cross promotions were different cultures
and this will be something that I am going to be talking about as well, with the actual history part of it instead of the actual significance of it, maybe outside of wrestling. So where are we going to start, Peanut Gallery?
All right, well, from the nitty-gritty of the pro wrestling biz, from how you duty to your television screen, today's topic is going to be crossing cultures with cross-promotion. You can put the pictures up in any order that you really want.
Well, I mean, you're going to be talking about specific exames, so I feel like that's something that we should at least talk about.
So let's pull up the first example, the partnership between Ring of Honor and New Japan Pro Wrestling.
And that was this one.
Yes.
So
what was significant about this, and the reason I chose this one as one of the most significant, is because it kind of jump-started this era of this modern cross-promotion era with AEW, with New Japan, and what's interesting about this is really kind of put these stars and many other stars on the same consciousness as the WWE.
Right.
Without this cross-promotion, AEW wouldn't exist. NXT in its current iteration wouldn't exist. New Japan would not be filmed. They wouldn't have English commentary here in America.
Right.
A lot of these things started because of this cross-promotion between Ring of Honor and New Japan Pro Wrestling.
Right. Because then you got really big matches and it introduced a whole new dynamic where you had New Japan stars winning the Ring of Honor champions and vice versa, and they wrestled at Wrestle Kingdom, which once again exposing the audience of the American fans to the Japanese style of professional wrestling.
Exactly. So I found that to be very interesting, and like I said, a lot of these cross-promotion really were companies from very different styles, from very different countries.
Right.
So that's why I chose this one first. Now, however, this is not the first time that this has been attempted.
Right.
So going to my second example, let's talk about TNA and New Japan Pro Wrestling.
Oh, yes. Time. That was Kiyoshi and No Limit.
Right. So this one was a spectacular failure on TNA's part. Now, New Japan, when they brought their TNA stars over to New Japan, they actually did the opposite. It was awesome. What was interesting about this, though, was it really exposed the Japanese audience to the American promotion.
Right, and unfortunately, it was TNA.
Right, and unfortunately, it was TNA. But you got some great people going over and winning the world champion, most notably Kurt Angle.
Right, Kurt Angle. You had Jeff Hardy face Tetsuya Naito at Wrestle Kingdom.
Yep.
There was that, but unfortunately, I think the person who was writing, especially in the early days, Vince Russo, the Japanese wrestlers do not like Russo because of how he books the Japanese wrestlers. We're obviously not saying that he's racist. He might be racist. He's most certainly racist.
Right.
But the thing is that I think this is the thing that really gave us the more modern-esque, because they started in like 2006.
Yeah, they did.
So you had that, you know?
Yep. And so, like I said, TNA did some very spectacular mistakes, most notably the repackaging of one Kazuchika Okada.
Right. But you know, like in the early days, like in 2005, I remember they had a couple of matches with Shinsuke Nakamura, who was the heavyweight champion, on their show, and this was Spike. So, I mean, it was a big get.
Right.
And I mean, you have to give the old TNA at least some credit with that, with bringing in these stars.
Right.
You know?
Yeah. So those are two modern examples of what can and cannot go wrong. Now let's go to ECW's partnership with
the World Wrestling Federation.
No, with Michinoku Pro.
Oh yes. Where is that? I think that was this one.
In fact.
Can you? I kind of wish you.
ECW.
That's fine. We'll just leave there.
didn't go extreme. They didn't have these death matches and stuff until their partnership with Michinoku.
Well,
Pro.
I think at that time it was Eastern Championship Wrestling still too. So you really had that where it was every other promotion until they really changed it over to this
Because ECW was not the first promotion in the world to do extreme wrestling. Actually, that sort of deathmatch style wrestling originated in Japan,
right,
and moved over to the United States. But it wasn't until
they cranked those hardcore things up to fucking infinity. It would have. I don't think the hardcore matches even back then would have flown even back then,
right?
Because I mean, they had like exploding stuff and piranhas and. I even get uncomfortable with how gory it is. Like, my God, how do these people not die? You know?
Yeah, and this style of wrestling, again, ECW popularized it a lot, but then you have the bleed over into the WWF,
which is I'll just leave that there.
Obviously, it's on the screen there. But
it was so popular.
Right, it was so popular that it had to.
WWE had to compete. Right.
They had to incorporate it in some aspect into their storylines.
Right. And I'm going to be talking a lot about the ECW WWF crossover as well on my segment as well. So
again, with the WWF, now this is before the 2001 invasion, but there was a 1997 ECW invasion.
Right.
Which, if you watch the Attitude Era, it's very well known.
Yes.
Within that. And, you have partnerships like, you have RVD and Sabu appearing on Raw, and Jerry King Lawler appearing in ECW.
And I have a couple of videos of those infamous times because I'm going to be talking about that too.
And it really highlighted, I think, one important aspect of partnerships, and this was a partnership primarily based upon the fact that ECW was financially backed by the WWF for many years,
and it wasn't known at all up I think until like 2001 when I think Heyman was under contract with him I think in 97, something like that. So. And that was hidden from the wrestlers, and the wrestlers were not happy because they were still getting paid by Heyman, where their checks were still bouncing. So,
the other thing, too, around the same time as this ECW invasion, WWF had another partnership with with the National Wrestling Alliance.
And that's the Jim Cornette picture, right?
Okay. That's the Jim Cornette picture. Now, this one was not as successful.
No.
And and if you know anything about the WWF and the NWA, they have always had their problems, but they've always tried to kind of, do their thing,
right,
get together and kind of do cross promotions. But a lot of these, especially the old NWA, we're talking pre Corgan NWA.
Right.
Obviously, the modern one is not the same as what it was back in the back even until like the mid 2000s.
Like this is mid late 80s, early 90s stuff that we're talking about here, where the NWA still was a very prominent organization,
right,
one of the most powerful everywhere else in the country, other than Georgia. Well, Georgia was part of it,
right?
Georgia and New York,
right?
So because they kind of took on a life of their own,
right? So, you had people like Jeff Jarrett showing up, and Dan Severn and the Rock and Roll Express appearing on Monday Night Raw.
Yep.
And so, again, these partnerships take form in many different ways, but what I find is that some companies do very well with it, and other companies, they just botch it up.
Right.
And you can tell the differences.
Let's talk about some of those.
Yeah, let's talk about some of those. Actually, I want to talk about another kind of partnership first, and this is a WWE partnership with Evolve Pro Wrestling and Dragon Gate USA.
Right. Now, this is before that they outright purchased them.
This was... So, a lot of these wrestling relationships, especially in the same countries, have this sort of low, they like move through the system. So you have, like WWE's partnerships back in the day with OVW.
Right.
And Florida Championship Wrestling.
And Smoky Mountain Wrestling. You're right.
So a lot of these partnerships are actually more of a farm system too.
Right, but they were independent as well. Now, Evolve was doing well by itself before WWE purchased it. And also, as I was looking at it, so the young whippersnapper that's right there, that's Darby Allin.
Yeah.
So you kind of got some, let's try that again. AEW stuff too. And, I think a lot of these bigger companies went through these farm systems because everybody here in this picture, at least at the time, other than Gargano, which is over there, that was, they were independent contractors in the purest form.
Yeah, they were. And so, so the way I see it is that these partnerships take on different forms depending on where they are in the world.
Right.
If they're within the same country, it becomes more of a client relationship to the mothership, the mother company.
Right.
And then you have these other companies that maybe they move through the system. Now, of course, that is changing, but most of the partnerships up until this past decade or so have been international promotions.
Right.
So you'd have a Japanese promotion and a Mexican promotion working together. You have a Mexican-American promotion working together. You wouldn't have two promotions within the same system.
Right. Let's talk
together. But let's talk about some partnerships that didn't go as well as planned. Most infamous one being the merger, if you want to call it that, between GFW and TNA, and that was the Jeff Jarrett one.
Yes, so
you gotta love Jeff Jarrett. We should do an entire episode.
Oh God, it's a clusterfuck. It's a cluster and a half. So obviously Jeff Jarrett was blacklisted from the WWF, and WCW's bought out, so he made Impact or TNA
at the time.
So this was because Jeff Jarrett still had some shares within TNA as the organization.
Right. And so he was trying to take back control, essentially.
It was kind of take back control, but then they kind of pushed him out, and that was just a bucket of worms. And with TNA, we can do a whole episode on just that whole era of clusterfuck because we lived it at the time. Right. So there was a great deal there, with the GFW merger thing, and then we're starting to do the merger without actually outright buying the name, and Jeff Jarrett was going through some issues.
Right.
But
what I find really interesting about Global Force Wrestling...
I swear to God, they're fucking dumbasses.
I know. But what I find most interesting about Global Force Wrestling is that Jeff Jarrett attempted to unify a bunch of different wrestling promotions together to create literally a global brand,
right?
Global
and
brand.
so
kind of like what NXT is doing right now,
right? Jarrett was the producer for Wrestle Kingdom. I think it was 8.
Yes,
for America.
For America.
So he was the one who got JR and Matt Stryker to do commentary. He was the one who produced the whole thing for Americans. Right. So people are like, oh my God, he's taking credit for that. I mean, in a way, yes. You should at least give the guy credit, right. Third generation wrestler. And it's not like his company. Well, this one went bad, right. The GFW one. But, I mean, Impact Wrestling, goddamn, it's a cockroach of the industry, I'm telling you.
What I find is, again, it really just depends on the people who are in charge. Now, Jeff Jarrett had a great idea going into it to really create a product that might have.
He had those things lined up too. He was working with Crash. He was working with New Japan. He was working with a bunch of them. He was like geared up and ready.
With Mexico, he was working in India. He was working in the UK. He was working in America.
Right. Unfortunately, his first tour was that big baseball stadium tour, which made it look really bad. You should have started small and then expanded out, because even we see in NXT. Even in a small venue, there's going to be great energy, and that's what people want to experience. Right. I don't care if I'm around 10,000 people or 500 people.
Right.
I want that experience.
And the other thing too is I think this may have inspired the WWE itself to create its own infrastructure and go out and build these NXT brands. So you started with NXT in the US. And we did an episode a while back to where I think we had discussed where WWE should set up NXTs next. It seems like they might be setting up in India.
Well, it's a huge market. Ring King was the first big one, and I mean, I think like the debut.
And I think that was under Global Force as well, if I'm not mistaken.
No, that was under TNA.
Oh,
it was a TNA thing.
It was pre-Global Force.
It was pre. Okay. Yep, it was pre. Jarrett was still in control.
Yeah.
That was like 2010 or something like that.
Yeah, but. So what we're seeing, I guess, is this modern movement of there's really kind of two paths if you want to expand internationally. Either you build the infrastructure out yourself, which is what the WWE is doing, or...
Well, they have the money to do it, though.
Or you bring these partnerships and you partner up with other companies to kind of do talent sharing.
Right.
And that's been kind of the tradition... or maybe even a mix of both, which is what WWE is doing in the UK right now, where some of these people are signed with other companies at the same time.
Right.
Which is very rare in the industry. But let's talk about WCW, and I think we're going to end on this WCW notes because WCW was kind of a pioneer in bringing these global partnerships together.
Eric Bischoff brought in the cruiserweights from Mexico and Japan to work. Here, and that's how he started out. Every single Nitro was with the cruiserweights, and they were international. It was actually, I don't think any of them were signed to full WCW contracts at the time.
And so WCW was seen for a long time as the place where you would go to see international talent.
Right.
That's how you got these international talents into the system. So really... I really think it was popularized in the United States with these global partnerships by WCW. WWF did it for a long time as well, but they're not really emphasizing that anymore because you're now able to reach a global audience through
and I mean it was a very big thing back in the 90s. Because we did not have the internet. I mean, there was Meltzer and stuff, but you couldn't really watch it unless you got the tapes.
Right,
and you didn't have to do that.
Yeah, and let's talk about the most enduring relationship WCW had was with New Japan Pro Wrestling.
Right.
And you go back and watch old WCW content, you'll see a lot of evidence of this partnership.
I mean, you had Great Muda. Yep.
You'll have Starrcade 1995, which was the World Cup of Wrestling, but not all of their relationships worked out, as many do. Obviously the most significant one was Gaia. The Japanese women's professional wrestling promotion, or GAEA. Of course, the WWE has had WCW has had a very very unique affair with women's wrestling in general at that time, especially after the whole WWF debacle or the WCW.
Where Medusa threw away the women's champion, and that was a whole, thing, because that was really the first shot.
Right.
But, they never really had...
WCW never really had a good women's division.
No, they never really put any emphasis on it, so we never really saw it. It was more about, I'm sorry, but especially in the 90s, it was tits and ass. That's kind of where our culture was in the 90s.
Yeah. So, kind of concluding this segment, I think what I want people to get out of is that these cross promotions have been the impetus for many of the trends that we see today.
Right.
And really, I kind of see a lot of great things come out of it, and even from the failures, you can see trends that people learn from these failures to create something that's more successful.
Right.
And I think that through our study of these cross promotions, we've realized, that sort of thing still exists today.
Right.
That's kind of partnership still exists, even amongst the failures. And I think that we've touched on quite a few of them.
Oh, absolutely.
So that's kind of where I'm at. Do you have anything else to add?
Not really, no.
Okay,
so when we come back, we're going to be doing Wrestling Lesson with Tiger Height, and we're going to be within the same thing. Cross promotions, I'm going to stick with WWF, but, cross promotions. So stay tuned for that.
All right.